Hey, what up, jerks? Welcome, welcome, welcome. Man, I'm excited today. So much going on. I'm excited personally because my schedule hopefully is starting to slow down. I'm gonna be able to do maybe a little more or maybe a little less. I may even take a break on this, but just have better content. Like we've been ramping it up, you noticed over the last few weeks. Been crazy here. I just so thankful for this community. Free Karen Reed today. It was day one of jury selection. And the state is just really cracking down on with these buffer zones, expanding them, and the way that they were roughing people up today. And the community handled it so well. So definitely going to be talking about that sometime tonight. Hopefully, if not over the next couple days. I left a little space this week. We got a big show on Friday night, definitely booked. This is a big show tonight. I hope people are watching. We got a big guest here tonight. There's some parallels with this guest and what he's been covering for decades out in LA and in Vegas and the West Coast with what's going on with Karen Reed. And it's something I've been interested in forever. Tupac and Biggie and all of that. And this guy, he's like a researcher. He's been in movies, documentaries, some of the biggest, best Tupac documentaries out there, I think. Totally. Yeah. Tupac assassination, Battle of Compton. You seen that? Phenomenal. He's written some books. Chaos Merchants is one of them. Definitely check that stuff out if you haven't. He's a great guest tonight too. I know we talked privately in the green room tonight, so I'm excited to talk to him because police accountability. There's a lot of parallels between what's going on out in Vegas right now with Karen Reed in some respects. So there may be some crossover talk. Yeah, some of you guys are here too. Yeah, you know the book. So let's bring him up. This is what people want to see tonight. Author. I don't know if I almost want to call him an activist, but journalist, definitely. Researcher, documentary, filmmaker, producer. I wonder if I'm missing any. He's also got a YouTube channel. We're definitely going to promote that YouTube channel tonight. And he's back posting videos and lives. That's why I was so excited to see him posting new content because he did take a break. Let's bring him up. His name's Michael Douglas Carlin. Welcome to the Young Jerks, Michael.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm got some fans here in the chat already. They know your book. Say that book. It's Chaos Merchants. What's that
Chaos
book about?
Merchants. Well, that's the book that I wrote with the late Russell Poole, and he and I continued the investigation after Tupac 187, and we were actually getting traction. We had people that wanted to reopen the cases, and it was in the DA's office, Dave Demersion. We were secretly meeting with him. Russell said, "Hey, if I go to the DA's office, it's going to cause a big stir." So he said, let's go meet socially with Dave Demersion. We'll listen to his band play. We'll have a couple of beers. And then when he has a break, he'll come and talk to us about the cases. And at first, he really wasn't feeling the cases. And then we presented 45 murder facts, which you can see on the American News website or the Century City News website. And it's the 45 Tupac murder facts. And once we presented that, he was really interested, wanted to get it open, and said, "Hey, I need a homicide investigator." And that's actually what led to Russell Poole's death at the sheriff's headquarters, trying to get the cases reopened.
That's wild. That this whole story about there's so much that's I've watched over the years on this that is wild. That's one of the wildest parts of it. But it's like the Karen Reed thing. I keep seeing parallels, like connections, even though they're not connected. But there's so many crazy things that have happened here. I also look at like Reggie Wright Jr., someone that is brought up a lot in your work and other people's work too on this. Um, and he's a very suspicious character around this. For people that don't know, he was the bodyguard for Death Row Records. And he's someone that a lot of people point fingers at. I would say you've pointed some fingers at him. And then he's also the son of a former police officer, and he also was a police officer himself. And then he became kind of a gangster. He got arrested later. This was the wild part for me. It was when he federally got arrested for like being part of a drug gang. He's a gangster cop, and your whole like theory forever has been that cops, dirty cops, have been at the center of the Tupac and the Biggie killings. And all of a sudden, this guy gets arrested for drugs with the gang, and his father was like a a big time known politician cop. He was a cop. He employed all kinds of cops. They were trying to say that they didn't employ the Rampart division cops, and then it gets busted, and people act like it didn't happen, like there was nothing. Like that to me was like, wow, this is the moment that people are gonna really look into Reggie and point the finger at Reggie, and then nothing happened. It was just like back to pointing at a guy who's dead, who a lot of evidence proves that he was just a patsy. What do you think about that in terms of there's no putting the pieces together and pointing at Reggie? It's like he's just Teflon. It just never sticks to him. Why is he so cocky, like knowing that so many people are pointing the finger at him, you think?
Well, I hate to say it, but David Mack said it. David Mack, when he was doing a Don Sikorsky interview, said, "Hey, I don't know why you guys are looking at Rampart." He said this stuff was going on in all the police organizations and in all of LAPD. He said Rampart wasn't any different than any other place, and I think we get some insights into this. And my federale friend, who I did a film called American Federale with, he laughed at me because I said, "Hey, right here at the border, America, the corruption's not on our side. It's only on your side." And he laughed. He thought that was the funniest thing. He said, "Who do you think we give the drugs to?" And I was so naive back then. I said, "I don't know. Who do you give the drugs to?" He said, "We give it to the sheriffs and to the police." And it's like, what a shocking statement. The police are responsible for trafficking in narcotics. And then we find out that evidence goes missing out of evidence lockers. And that happened at LAPD. And Rafael Perez was convicted of that. And then you have David Mack, who does an armed bank robbery, and he goes down for that. And then you have Reggie Wright Jr., who goes down for drug trafficking and money laundering. And Reggie Wright Sr. goes down for money laundering only.
The father too. I couldn't believe that.
Because that was a plea deal. And if you really want to know about Reggie, I mean, he's been talking a lot about me lately. But the crazy thing is, he put his mother's name on the bank account that he was doing the drug trafficking in. I mean, who does that? You're going to sell out your own mother? And that just tells you the kind of people that we're dealing with. We're dealing with really bad people.
Suge
And
wouldn't sell out his mother. Well, we know
yeah,
that. Suge would never sell out his mother.
no, 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 no. And you know what,
Suge
Suge?
loves his mama. Yeah.
I don't believe Suge has ever told on anybody.
Nope.
Suge is not a snitch. I think, Suge
To
is,
his detriment in some respects.
to his detriment, 100%. He could have cut better deals. And, when you look at Suge Knight, and this is what I say about American justice, if and when Suge Knight can get a fair trial in America, then we all can get a fair trial. And if Suge Knight can't get a fair trial, then none of us can. And because Suge Knight is the boogeyman. He's that guy who took credit for a lot of things he didn't do. And what happened? Everybody just said, "Oh, he must be this horrible guy." But look what he did in the record industry. I mean, he made some of the most amazing music, getting Crips and Bloods to work together, and nobody had ever done that before.
Yeah, that's an unknown story too. I think of the it's so funny, all of this stuff is so unknown to like the average person. They don't get that deep into it. And if you look at Death Row, they did something that no one had ever done, bringing Crips and Bloods together at a record label, and all hell didn't break loose right away. Right
Yeah,
away.
it finally did break loose. But, that was after Gary Webb came out with the whole story about the CIA putting drugs out on the streets of America. And you can imagine what happened. You know, the drug industry has gone hand in hand with the music industry since the 40s because you had to have cash to pay the program director at the radio station to play your playlist. You had to have cash back then to get, a record press, to get it distributed, to have shelf space. So Suge Knight didn't create the music industry. He just knew how to use it. He knew how to make it happen. And so, those little packets of cash, he knew how to do that. He knew how to hand that off to the person that was appropriate at the right time. And it made these records blow up. It made them huge. And, we've been manipulated for years and years and years going back. And you had to have the intelligence community inside the police departments. They were protecting the interest of business. And it's no different than the U.S. military going to Afghanistan and we take it over. And the first thing we do is guard the poppy field. Or we go down to Zamboanga Holo in the Philippines. And what are we guarding? We're guarding the offshore drilling for Exxon. I mean, what's the difference? And the cops, they have another interest, and their interest is to keep those drugs going out on the streets. So they got that covert cash, and the CIA was behind that shit. And what do? I mean, we really need to purge all of the intelligence community out of the policing because those guys, they come from military backgrounds. They run operations when they're in the military and they get out what that skill set just doesn't exist anymore. No, they employ it inside of police organizations. And if you watch my film, Minnesota, the modern day Selma, they send a police operative in to our group who suckers us into going right where they wanted us to go. And he told us, the white supremacists are shooting the protesters. You guys got to go to the freeway. And we get suckered into it. Okay, we're marching to the freeway. And we march down into the most dangerous setting you could possibly have. We're surrounded on all sides. The police have the high ground. We've got the low ground. We are just really bait at that point. And I was knee deep in it. And, I knew it was a bad idea to go down on the freeway, but I was like, you know what? In for a penny, in for a pound. You got to go through with it. I knew it was a bad idea, but I got great footage of it. And eventually, the crowd got dispersed by them, shooting tear gas at us. We all got tear gassed. And it was really something. But, that's the film Minnesota. And that was part of, the George Floyd thing. I was there when the buildings were on fire and the police corruption continues to this day. The women got up and they told stories about how their sons or husbands or what have you had been murdered by the police. And there were many stories of that. And I would just say this, police everywhere, it must be a requirement that they watch that film. I'll give that film to the police departments for free because police should watch that and know what the pain is that the families go through when their loved one is murdered by the police. One of those stories was just horrific. It was about a man who was murdered by the police. They thought nobody was looking, and they threw his body into a dumpster, and nobody would have even known, but they found his body later out, in the dumpster or, having been dumped. And then they started looking at surveillance tapes and they found out it was the cops behind it. And then all those surveillance tapes just magically go missing.
Disappeared. Geez, that sounds familiar. That sounds so
Yeah.
familiar.
Yeah.
The thing too, I just want to make sure that people are aware too. Like you and I are both like we like good police. We've worked
We
you've
love
worked with
police.
Russell Poole. We're not anti-police, and I think that the best police want reforms and they want to fix a lot of the issues. And one of the things that when we're talking about like how bad it really is, you talked about the drug issue. Since you've been covering all this stuff, how long have you been covering? Let me ask you that first. How long have you been covering the Tupac and the Biggie stuff?
Well, so Tupac and Biggie goes back to 2013 was the first meeting. 2014, I meet with Chris Blatchford and I get the confession letter. Russell passes away in 2015. So since Russell passed, it's almost 10 years.
Yeah. So over almost like looking at 12, 13 years you've been covering this. And
Yeah.
during that time, like a lot of the stuff that you've been saying about the police corruption, like the police gangs, that has been something that has been documented now. Like it's been mainstream press has picked up on this. There's documented police gangs, especially in the Los Angeles area. That's a big thing. Is have you like is that still going on? Has there been any progress in terms of shutting those police gangs down?
They're
Because
not
there it's known now. It's known that there are actually police gangs operating within Los Angeles, right?
100%. And these police gangs, you know, the Vikings were frustrated because they saw the CIA putting out drugs on the streets of America and all their busts were coming to naught. So they decided rather than, trying to fight the CIA, they were just going to compete with them. And so they started doing their own, stuff. They selling their own drugs and all that stuff. And then you had Operation Big Spender, which is in Battle for Compton, and there was one cop that he didn't want to like snitch on his fellow officers, and so he said, "Okay, I'll be part of it." But he was taking his cut and burying it in his backyard, and they got a conviction on this cop. And at sentencing, they said, "Is there anything you want to say?" He said, "Well, the way you got your conviction was unfound wealth. You didn't know how I had all this wealth. But here's the thing: you got a false conviction, and I'm willing to take my deal that I got convicted of. But I actually have all the money. It's buried in my backyard." And sure enough, they went, and there it was, all buried in his backyard. And so even that conviction was a false conviction, and he did his time, like a stand-up guy, but he didn't want to tell on his fellow cops. And that's part of the issue. We have that thin blue line, and we're not going to allow anybody to break that thin blue line. And so what happens, how they all start to go down is they start to moonlight. They start to do off-duty work. They've rented out their badge and their gun, and they're, okay, I'm just going to do it for an hour. I get $300. That seems like a pretty simple
As
transaction.
as couriers, basically, for
Yeah, or
drugs
whatever.
in
I
a lot
mean,
of cases, right? Yeah.
it just starts out, okay, I got this record store. I want you to just do security for an hour because we're going to have an event there. And okay, seems simple enough. $300. Yeah, everybody wins. And oh, but by the way, you got to use your badge. We want you to have that prominent. We want you to have your gun prominent. And so it's not like plain clothes security. No, they're renting out their badge and their gun. Now a crime happens, and they have to turn a blind eye to the crime. So now they've compromised their badge. And that's how it starts. That's the first step. And it leads down to, if they continue on this path, it leads down to murder for hire. Because at some point, there's so much stuff on these cops, they're so compromised that they can be pushed around to do anything, including murder for hire. And that kind of stuff is going on inside of our police right now. And if you go to like Puerto Rico, I interviewed Matt Perez. He was an FBI, like the special agent in charge, and he was in Puerto Rico and he was in El Paso. And when he was in Puerto Rico, he had a great relationship with the police in one respect. They were helping him with some of the organized crime, but they were always trying to get information about the murder for hire that they were doing. And he found out they were doing the actual hits. They were being paid $7,000 a hit, which doesn't seem like much money. It was probably late 80s, early 90s, that kind of money for a hit. But part of that hit included fouling up the crime scene so that there could be no investigation or prosecutions into those murders that they perpetrated. And so when you have cops that are actually perpetrating the murders, they know how to make that crime scene unprosecutable.
Absolutely. They're trained in it.
They're
This
trained in it.
is
Yeah.
kind of what we're talking about with the Karen Reed case that's going to a second trial right now in Massachusetts that we've been covering quite a bit. It's a lot of the same themes are coming up over and over with different cases here. Let's talk about the big one that you've been covering for a long time, the Tupac case, because right now there's a guy on trial apparently for murder who self-confessed, who I think both of us don't think did it.
Okay.
I think he, so Keith Davis, I don't think he did it, and I don't think pretty sure you feel the same way. Um, what's going on with his case right now with Keith Davis, and maybe we'll get into why you don't think he did it after that too.
Well, part of what I think's going on with this case is I think he's got some kind of compromised attorneys, or they're either incompetent or they're like working on behalf of the prosecution, like quietly sinking the case of their client. And that goes on. It's case trading. It's been going on for years. There's no way to stop it. But you know how it works. If you do
Oh yeah,
favors for the DA's office, you're going to get favor back from them. And when a case comes in with somebody who could really pay, they're going to try and steer that case to you so that you can get a paycheck. And so they do that kind of stuff all the time. And so when you look at the Kei D thing, it's pretty simple. Sheriff Gillespie, when he was in office, purged all the original files in any case that was over so many years old. So those files no longer exist. Now, according to Detective Gordon Martins, who's since passed away, he told me that that case could never be prosecuted because the original documents don't exist. But we don't see any motion by the criminal defense team to have them do an examination of the original Tupac murder books. And that's not going to happen, most likely, because they really do want to help.
not
uh,
trying. Yeah.
yeah, they want to help get a conviction in this case. So we could just put a bow on it and say we got it. Now,
Have they talked to you? Because that if I was running a defense team for Keith Davis, the first person I'd call is you to be on the team. Give us all the info.
no, nobody's reached out to me, and there's so many ways to debunk this case. The Orlando stuff there, Russell had said that there was video footage of Orlando. I mean, Russell Poole had said there was video footage of Orlando Anderson at the bar. There was video of him going to his room, and originally he had been cleared by Las Vegas police as a suspect. So wait a minute. If this guy has been cleared as a suspect at one point, well, where are all these notes about him being cleared as a suspect? And the Las Vegas Metro Police have to provide that to the criminal defense team. So that's another way to completely debunk and derail this case. And there's many, many other things that they're not doing that they could do, which leads me to believe either they're in on it or they're incompetent. And that's what we see over and over again. And in some ways, we kind of saw the same thing with Suge Knight. Suge Knight was railroaded. There was not a criminal defense that was allowed to proceed on his behalf. And how do I know? Because I actually had him an attorney. I was working with his niece, Crystal Anderson, and we had found an attorney, and we contracted with that attorney to represent Suge Knight in that case, and they would not allow that attorney to see his client. He was denied by the sheriffs. He was denied by the prosecution. They wouldn't allow it, and the judge
The
would.
judge, the judge wouldn't allow it.
The judge wouldn't allow it. No.
Why did they say why? Did they give a ruling?
Well, so what happened when we finally did talk to the attorney? Suge Knight took a plea deal, and they gave him what they call two murders under the table. They told him, look, you take this plea deal, or we are going to charge you with these two additional murders. And we know you can't afford a defense now for one murder. What are you going to do when you have to defend three murders? And that's why Suge Knight took the plea deal, because that's what he was given. And honestly,
You're
that's
correct.
why I go back to, if Suge Knight can get a fair trial, then we all can. But Suge Knight can't get a fair trial in this country right now. But he really should get a fair trial. And they just didn't want to present evidence. They didn't want the Terry Carter thing, guns, Tams. It's called Murder Burger. That's where Bill Russian was shot 17 times. They never wanted that stuff to come into evidence because nobody would have ever convicted him. And they wanted Suge Knight gone because he ran what I believe is the money laundering division of the CIA. And he was the record executive. He was focused on making great music. He was in the recording studio. He did the, the business affairs part of the record side. And there were other people that were doing the backdoor, drug stuff that was going on to make sure there was plenty of cash to make those payoffs. And so they wanted Suge Knight put away for the rest of his life. And that's what they did.
A bunch of people are no longer here. You mentioned Russell Poole earlier. There's also like the bodyguards, Frank Alexander and Michael Moore as well. You've been around those guys, right? And I think you probably interviewed them. They were part of the movies you were in.
Yeah, I never met those guys. I never met those guys, but Russell had interviewed them for the actual investigation. And, he's the one that really opened up the investigation into Tupac's murder at LAPD because he felt these murders were connected. And so he's the original lead investigator on the Tupac murder for LAPD. And if the actual conspiracy started in Los Angeles, then LAPD would have jurisdiction. And that was what we had determined, was that there was a meeting in Balboa Park, which, was disguised as a gang summit to find out how much it would cost to get rid of Suge and Tupac. And so the conspiracy really did start in Los Angeles. And that's what we were kind of honing in on to get the murders reinvestigated. And there were clues that had come in, and Russell couldn't understand when these clues were leading back to Death Row Records that there was a difference between Russell Poole and Suge Knight. And so he, blamed Suge Knight for it for many years. And finally, when he realized that Suge Knight was a victim, and just because you own the record label, you own the shares, doesn't mean everybody that's inside that company thinks the same way. And he realized that there were people inside of Death Row Records that were trying to topple Suge Knight, trying to kill him and Tupac that night. And then that same circle of people was involved in the murder of Biggie as well.
It was basically the whole thing is that these guys were, cops. It's like a internal takeover of Death Row Records with this group of people, basically. That's basically what it really was, right?
Well, and what happened was you let the thieves into the record label. Those thieves came in to steal the evidence out of the evidence locker in Snoop's murder trial. And so you can imagine what that's like. They have to plan an operation to get into the Pacific Division. And so Kevin Gaines had access to the Pacific Division. He was dating Sharitha Knight back in the day. At the time of his death, he was dating Sharitha Knight. At the same time, Sharitha was married to Suge. And so there's this whole thing going on, this dynamic of jealousy and people and compromise and whatnot.
You put gangsters. I mean, that's true. Like Death Row in the beginning, they used gangsters as bodyguards, and when that got out of control, the lore is that Jimmy, the record producer, that the real owner of everything in the end, and always the real owner, or his bosses, whoever his bosses really are, Jimmy Iovine, he basically told Suge, you got to get some police officers instead of having these gang members, protecting you as security. And they went and got dirty cops. So they had like dirty cops around gangsters and music people, and this is what happens, right? I mean, this is the whole situation of what the culture was like around Death Row at the time.
Well, it's a very dangerous place. And Tupac, of course, has shot 2 off-duty police officers in Atlanta. They were harassing, a young kid. He didn't like seeing that, so he tried to stop them. They told him to mind his own business. And he pulled out his gun and he shot them both. And he shot them both in the ass, And
He won
so,
the case because it was illegal. He had illegal, like a legal license. It was illegal. Those guys were doing shit to those kids, it turned out. And Tupac won the case. They tried to prosecute him, but he actually beat the cops in the case, right?
well, it got dismissed. It got
Yeah.
dismissed because the cops were drunk and disorderly, and they had stolen guns out of the evidence locker. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's like
That's what I'm saying.
every
There's so many wild turns in this, and it's always the same shit that comes up.
so
Crazy.
we got evidence missing out of the evidence locker in New York on French Connection and Eddie Egan, Popeye Doyle. We got evidence missing in the Atlanta case, right? There's evidence the guns are stolen, missing out of the evidence locker. Then you have a gun that flows through death row records that shoots Officer Brian Watt in Long Beach, and the feds get involved in that, and they come knocking on Mayor Omar Bradley's door and say, "You're either dumb or you're in on it." And he looks at him and says, "I'm dumb." And it turns out that gun flowed through Reggie Wright Jr. And so the Compton Police Department now needs to get investigated. The Compton Police Corruption Report is like 96 pages of all the malfeasance. There's missing cocaine out of the evidence locker. There's missing PCP. There's missing marijuana, missing guns. And the police department is so corrupt that it needs to be shut down. But there's always blowback when you do something like that. And if you look at the blowback on shutting down the corrupt Compton Police Department, Gary Beverly, who looks just like Omar Bradley, is murdered a week before because they're going to try and stop the vote to shut down the police department. He's murdered on the 91 freeway in stop and go traffic. And there are eyewitnesses that are coerced not to talk about it, not to come forward. And then you have the vote that happens, and then Mayor Omar Bradley gets indicted for a bowl of oatmeal and he's told by Bernard Parks not to shut down the corrupt Compton Police Department. And who's Bernard Parks? He's the one that handpicked Rafael Perez, David Mack, Kevin Gaines, Nino Durden, Sammy Martin, all those guys that are part of the Rampart scandal. He handpicked those guys. And so you have the Rampart scandal in conjunction with the corrupt Compton PD. And, there's 6 police helicopters in Compton. What do you need 6 police helicopters for Compton for? One of those helicopters crashes taking off from the Compton school warehouse. And there's kilos of cocaine strewn about the debris field. So it was like a slick thing. At the Compton airport, every morning, a jet would show up with the coke. The 6 police helicopters would take the coke wherever they're supposed to take the coke, and one of those crashes, and there's, cocaine strewn about the debris field. I mean, it all makes perfect sense, but it's just a horrific tale of what has really gone on in America, because I believe it's not just Compton. It's not just LAPD. It's not just the sheriffs. It's not just the Las Vegas Metro Police. It's all of America. Border Mexico, they told me, hey, we give the drugs to the cops. And so I think when David Mack has said that we have a problem that's more systemic, I think that's what we need to look at. And one of the solutions I think that I see is that we have to pay cops really well, because they do it's a horrific job that they have to do. They put their lives on the line. They wear a badge, they wear a gun, and they might have to take a life. That's asking a lot from them. So we got to pay them like 200 grand each every single year. But the other thing we got to do is they got to bring their own insurance policy. And if they bring their insurance policy to the job and they start to have a lot of claims on their insurance, what's going to happen? Well, experience modification goes up, and they're going to have to pay more. And eventually the bad cops are going to be priced out of the market. And that's one of the solutions that we must have. Another solution.
Solution. I love it. I love that. That is such a good idea. Like, that's what we should do. And totally too, like, pay them more. There's also another issue I hear about from cops, actually, especially ex-cops that we talk to. is that not only is the public kind of against them, they feel like a lot of times their own fellow police officers are often against them. There's so much, it's so highly politicized. There's no friends. Everyone's out to get each other to get ahead. And it's like the system, like if you go, buck the system at all, you got a target on your back and you're done. So like it's the culture too. Like it's not welcoming to people who have other options. You know what I mean? Like the best
Oh,
people,
yeah.
you can do a lot of things. You don't necessarily want to be a cop. So I think we should pay them a lot of money. I agree with you on that too.
Well, and management has to be in on it, all the corruption. And
That's right.
so management's got to be purged from the police now, because anybody that's in management had to turn a blind eye to things. They call it go along to get along. And so, you have all these cops that are doing this malfeasance. And you may have good cops right next to them that don't even know. And I'll tell you a little bit of a story. So the federales come across the border and they meet with Matt Perez. And they're going to go take down drug lord Pablo Acosta. And they get across the border, and the commandante, his name was Guillermo Calderoni, and he looks at Matt Perez and he says, "Hey, we know who's corrupt on your side of the border." And Matt has got all of his guys with him at the FBI, and he's looking at his men and not knowing who next to him is corrupt. And he says, "I'll tell you who they are, but you got to give me some assurances from above." And he calls up to his, upper level people, and they say, "Oh, no, 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 don't go there. You can't proceed. You can't give him those assurances because we don't want anybody knowing." So they're obviously in on it. I mean, it's like a crazy story when you think about it. So to this day, Matt Perez had no idea who on his FBI was corrupt. He didn't know who the cops were. So, you could be in a police organization thinking that it's all functioning perfectly, but the corruption is on a need to know basis. And they don't want other people to know. And so you might even, like a Russell Poole, he gets promoted, becomes a detective at robbery homicide. And once he moves up to a level where they're telling him, stand down, don't investigate, it leads to cops, stop it, got your report, go along to get along. He didn't want to do it because he's never had to do that in the past. And now he has to do that, or he has to be pushed out. And he was hazed and pushed out of the department 6 months before he vested in his pension fund. And he said, "I have to do this to maintain my own personal integrity." And so I call him officer friendly. He was officer friendly, and he wanted to always do the right thing.
Sad, sad what happened to him too. And in terms of they pushed him out, it's just like, oh, so I mean, there was a movie too that I saw bits of that I so wanted to see that was made about not on one of your books. It was the other guy, Russell Sullivan's book,
Randall
and it was
Sullivan, yeah,
Randall Sullivan. It's City
yeah,
of Lies was the movie with Johnny Depp. It looked
Johnny.
really good, and then never came out. Do you think? I mean, I looked into that like several things. Like first, it was a Johnny Depp scandal that didn't seem like a scandal in the end, and then the studio behind it basically went bankrupt and it got sold. But that movie never really came out at all, did it? Besides like going to film screenings or something. Like where did
Yeah.
anyone ever see it? City of Lies.
I mean, it did get seen, but it was, a limited release, and not a lot of money was put behind it, and it was pretty much shelved. And I can tell you this about Russell Poole. He had sold his life rights to HBO. And that became an issue when we were doing Tupac 187. I mean, do we really have the right to this, in that it might contain some parts of Russell Poole's life story? We had to look at the contract. So we looked at the contract. And the upshot is that HBO had an option to exercise and completely own Russell Poole's life story, and they exercised the option. And then Bill Bratton, who is the one that's brought in from the outside in the consent decree to take over LAPD.
From
Come,
Boston. He's from
yeah.
it's so funny how all of this, it's like bi-coastal, right? It's
Oh yeah.
like a Boston guy, Bill Bratton.
And I know Bill Bratton. I mean, I know him. I mean, super nice guy. You know, hang out with him, what have you. Super nice. His wife, Ricky Kleiman, a broadcaster, super nice. You know, but you know, they take care of the police department. So he goes to HBO and tells them, "You must shelve this," and they did. They shelved the rights to Russell Poole's life story. So when Labyrinth gets made, there's not one payment, not $1 that goes to Russell Poole's family because they couldn't pay Russell Poole's family or it would stir up a rights issue.
HBO.
And so, you know, I think that thing got shelved the first time, and I think it got shelved when it was City of Lies. And they did release it. You know, I mean, Brad Furman did a great job on that film. You know, I mean, we're talking about Forrest Whitaker. It doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah. I
You
mean,
know,
that seemed like such a good casting, Forrest Whitaker and Johnny Depp, and it was like an exciting movie. I think that movie would have done such big box office. I'm like,
yeah.
it's shocking that they can make a movie like that and get all the way to the release and then just cancel it and just keep
Well,
like
there's a
it's
rail on which we can never like tread, and that is the unholy alliance of entertainment with the police. And when you start to cross those lines and understand that, you know, the police have a lot to do with Hollywood. You know, if you look at the guy who created Star Trek, right, Gene Roddenberry, you know, former LAPD, and you know, we don't really know these things. You know, it's like the LAPD also, and I want to say about 1950, and that was Parker, and he created an intelligence operation that basically came from the military. He hired women to be honeypots to send them out. So all this Epstein, Diddy, Howard, what's his name, Playboy, you know, this stuff has been going on for years. Heidi Fleiss, Madam Alex, you know, and it's all about getting people compromised in compromising positions, getting videotape on them or documents or dirt, and being able to use them the way you want to use them.
control.
Oh, Bill, you're going to vote this way because, you know, I got this little tape, and you know, you don't want that coming out, and you know, that's just the nature of how we have, you know, as Americans, outwork this republic, and it's not good. I mean, the whole thing is reprehensible. But that's what we're up against. We're up against, you know, Jesse Ventura had come out and talked about how when he won the governorship, he had a meeting and there were 23 CIA operatives that showed up. Well, they're not supposed to operate on US soil, but they did. And, you know, he's being told what he needs to do and what have you. And Jesse Ventura has kind of, you know, been a sellout ever since, you know, unfortunately. And it's, you look at Maxine Waters. Maxine Waters wrote the foreword for Gary Webb's book, but she's voted the most corrupt politician, you know, several years in a row. And, you know,
The system changes you.
yeah,
You could be like an honest cop, and if you're there forever and you move up, it's gonna change you. Just does.
when
It's like doesn't matter who you are. Like
the cartels have intel on who has a sick kid. They have intel on, you know, who has a sick family member, and they know who your wife is, they know who your kids are, they know where they go to school. And so when they want to leverage somebody and say, okay, so the red truck's going to come through and it's going to be powdered and what have you, and the dog's going to go off on it, you're going to take that over to secondary, and everybody's going to swarm around it thinking we really caught something here. And then the 5 vans with the real dope are going to flow through. And, you know, this is the kind of thing that just goes on. They run these operations and they're very good at it. They're, you know, and it's part of American culture now. You know, we demand this stuff. You know, I'm not a Coke user, but I've seen enough cocaine in the industry when I was, you know, in Hollywood. I saw cocaine, you know, from the time I was 15. I mean, it was crazy. And I never used it, but at the same time, I knew it was a part of our culture. It was the 80s, 90s, 2000s. And then, of course, what do? We go to Afghanistan, we take over the poppy fields, that becomes the opioids, and then we put those out on the street, peddle them on the street, and then people that get addicted, well, they got to turn to the streets and get heroin. I mean, it's really a sick society that we've created, and it's time for it to all end. And so part of what needs to happen with this, policing thing with the insurance and what have you, and paying them well, no moonlighting whatsoever. No moonlighting. If your brother-in-law calls you up and says, "Hey, I need help Saturday moving," my insurance won't allow it, and I can't moonlight of any kind. I can't even help you move because my insurance doesn't allow it. And that's what needs to happen with policing. The other thing, whenever there's a murder, when one human takes the life of another human, it doesn't matter who it is, it must be investigated. The the things that are the evidence that's found needs to be available to both sides, to the prosecution and to the defense, fully transparent. And then in those courtrooms, we need to have interns in those courtrooms, people that are going to law school, and they need to look at every judge's decision and weigh in on it and write about those judges too. And we need to make sure that every single person that's in this chain does the right thing for the right reasons all the time. And now mistakes are going to get made. I get it. Mistakes are going to get made. Right now, by definition, every single police organization is corrupt. And why do I say that? Because they can't possibly pay out the damages for even the mistakes that are happening. And management has to cover stuff up, or the fines, that the fees that they're going to pay out in damages from lawsuits and what have you is going to be, so it's going to bankrupt those departments. So there's got to be a fund for it. We got to be able to pay out when a mistake legitimately happens, and that just, there's got to be a fund for it. And the insurance on those cops is one thing, and the cities should have secondary policy for if the amount's higher and they got to pay out. But management has to be incentivized not to cover stuff up.
Like, that's what happened in LA with the Wallace lawsuit,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that could have bankrupted that city. And
Yeah, I
she
mean,
almost won that. That was wild. And
she
even
would
that,
have won that lawsuit. They stipulated that Rafael Perez was at the Peterson Automotive Museum, and he was kicking the shell case. And why I bring up Puerto Rico, Rafael Perez is Puerto Rican, and those Puerto Rican police were down there doing murder for hire, $7,000, but they were also messing up the crime scene so that you could never get a conviction. And the crazy thing about that case is that those shell casings were messed up by Rafael Perez. He was probably dropping shell casings to be collected at the same time, so you don't know which one actually was from the gun at the time. And then there were shell casings that were being dropped off over at Cedars-Sinai Hospital, people bringing them in going, "Hey, these shell casings, we found them at the crime scene." And so those are getting entered into evidence. The police that are at Cedars-Sinai didn't get any names of people dropping off the shell casings. They didn't do witness cards. They didn't get phone numbers. They didn't do anything. They just said, "Oh, yeah, some like random people just brought us shell casings." And then they go to check to find the video surveillance footage at Cedars-Sinai Hospital in LA. I mean, that's a big time hospital, and the video footage is missing. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And so, when you have a sophisticated crime like this and the criminals are savvy, and we're talking about police officers who investigate crimes that are behind this murder, that's a bad thing. And the sophistication of those crimes, we can't really allow that to happen in society.
what do you think is going to happen with the going back to the Tupac case? Because right now
Well,
Keith Davis is on trial. What's going to happen? What do you
I
think?
think I think Keith Davis is in danger of being murdered in jail. I think that's number one. That would just solve it. Oh yeah, we had the right guy, but oh, he got murdered in jail, and there's already been a few scrape ups inside. So that's one. Two, I think they could get a conviction, and that would be because he has ineffectual counsel. And what I'm seeing, I'm not impressed with these guys. They did blame it on Reggie Wright. I think that was a good move because there's a lot of evidence that points to Reggie Wright. And so that was good. But how far is that going to go? I mean, and they're saying he was murdered in the hospital, which I believe. I believe he was murdered in the hospital because what doctor comes out and says a celebrity is going to live if he's not? It defies logic. No attorney would allow a doctor to go out and give a press conference if there wasn't a very, reasonable chance that Tupac was going to survive. And then he takes a turn for the worst and dies like immediately and has cardiac arrest. It's almost like somebody put something in his IV. And I talked to a few emergency room doctors who told me it would be the easiest thing in the world to kill somebody in the hospital. It's you can inject right into those IVs. It's not hard. It's not hard at all. And then if you look at his body, there was a hearse that was idling in the warehouse waiting for Tupac's body before he had cardiac arrest. And so they wheel him in as soon as he dies, they wheel him right into the hearse. Off he goes, quick autopsy, and then a quick cremation. And that's unheard of any death. They're going to do a cremation like less than 24 hours later. And the autopsy, if you look at the autopsy paperwork, I mean, that's crazy. And there's even stories floating by Las Vegas cops that the most egregious things you can imagine were allowed to happen with cops being allowed to participate in the autopsy. And that's just crazy stuff when you think about it because they hated Tupac. Once he shot those two off duty Atlanta police officers, he was on a list. They call them cop killers. And they will run an operation to get a cop killer smoked out so that they can kill him because they don't want people on the streets that are going to point their guns at police. They don't want people that are going to shoot police. I don't blame them for that. Nobody wants to have somebody on the streets that's going to shoot you if you're a cop. But at the same time, I mean, do we have to have a list? And it's happened over and over. Somebody who has gone after the cop, shot a cop in like places like Compton, they get out and next thing you know, there's an operation and that person is dead. And at the
That's the
hands,
thing that people don't realize, that cops often will self-organize themselves off the books and do
yeah,
off the book shit like
oh
this.
yeah,
That they actually do stuff like this. It does happen. Not everywhere. I don't. I'm not, Michael. I think you're further down the rabbit hole than me because I don't think it's everywhere. But maybe you're right. Maybe it is everywhere because I mean, everywhere I see lately, I mean, because we're covering this small little town in Canton, and geez, we all have our suspicions like crazy on the stuff that we're seeing. And a lot of the stuff you're saying is the same stuff we're seeing, like, oh, we lost this, or we don't have this, or the evidence disappears. It's like all the same stuff. So I don't know. Maybe I should go down the rabbit hole more. I want to ask about more about the stuff about Reggie Wright Jr. Um, what is like, because I kind of have an idea. I mean, I just watch him. He's a little snake. He's a little worm. I don't trust that guy as far. I mean, you know, he's not a trustworthy person. Just look at him. He's very smug. He's very, he's mean. He's a mean person too. He acts like, I don't like his character. I'll say that. And I don't like that. Like he even laughed when people die. Like it's just kind of like, what is the evidence do you think against Reggie Wright Jr., the cop who is a gangster as well, who is the security guy for Suge Knight, and who seems to try to have taken over the company after Suge died. I mean, Suge went to jail. Excuse me.
yeah, should went
He's
to
like
jail.
death. I mean, it is like death. I mean, what they've done to Suge is like death. But yeah, he went to jail. Excuse me.
Well, I mean, death might have been better for him than
Yeah,
torture that they
easily.
put that man through, and when he got out of prison, he got out to a bunch of lawsuits, and he was just embroiled in lawfare and never had a chance. I mean, it was just nonstop what they did to him. But on the Reggie side, you know, they inserted themselves into Death Row Records. Reggie Wright Sr. came to Suge and said, "Hey, we've got intel that you're going to be kidnapped."
Right.
And that's how they inserted themselves into Death Row Records. And then Reggie comes in. Reggie's supposed to get on a plane and go to Atlanta when the confrontation happens with Puffy, and Reggie misses his plane for whatever reason, and then Big Jake gets killed, and Reggie slides into head of security. And my understanding about Big Jake was he was a no nonsense guy, and everybody that's in Pyru loved Big Jake. He was from Campanella Park, and he was loved, but he also was a no nonsense guy, who's going to take care of business with security, and he did a great job. Well, you wonder, how is it that he gets killed at this thing that goes on? It's Big Jake and Suge, and they're probably outnumbered with Puffy, but Suge didn't care about that. When Suge was bodyguarding for the DOC, they used to go into nightclubs, and the DOC would go into the women's restroom, and Suge would be in the right outside. And, he'd be in there because the women were in the women's restroom. They all had to go. And so, the women would come out, and then the men would come and want to fight them. And it'd be like 20 people lining up to fight Suge and the DOC, and they'd take them all out and knock the crap out of them. And so here's this guy who goes from bodyguard to now he's got to be terrified. He's going to be kidnapped. I mean, it's like it almost defies logic. And I don't think Suge was terrified that he would, be kidnapped. But then you got Jimmy, right? Who is
Right.
close, according to Death Row Dave, Jimmy was personal friends with Reggie Wright Sr.
That makes sense.
Now these guys are being inserted. And so,
Isn't this the real game? This is what I've always thought, that these record labels work with intelligence agencies and cops to keep their artists in line and rip them off in the end.
well, of course. And if you look at
Threaten them and threaten and control them, and because the artists know it too.
Well, but I mean, what artists that own significant record catalogs are still alive?
Yeah.
I mean, you know,
Right? They're better, and they make more from those catalogs at the moment that artist dies.
oh yeah, and Jimmy told Suge, "Hey, you just hit the lotto because Tupac's dead," and Suge was offended by that. He's like, "That's my friend. It's not about money. You know, listen, we can go get more money, but like a dear friend, that we cannot just go get." And I think the one thing I see that's sincere about Suge is he loved Tupac. That was his little buddy. They were talking about, doing movies together and what have you. And yeah, maybe Tupac was leaving death row. He fired David Kenner, he fired Reggie Wright, and so that's likely that there was a renegotiation, a haggle that was coming down the pike, and sometimes you got to say, "Hey, I'm out of here," before the negotiation happens, and you get a better deal, right? I mean, we know that was certainly going on at the time. And you have, Reggie, who takes everything personally, and he gets fired by Tupac. We don't know how he took that, and he's denied it. "Oh, I wasn't fired by Tupac." And then he's admitted it. "Well, I was fired by Tupac." And so it's crazy, all these stories that we hear. But like the
He
Reggie,
changes his stories all the time. Reggie changes his stories so often.
yeah. Well, and on that front, Reggie was known to rob the inmates when he was a jailer. He was known to rob drug dealers. He was known to traffic in drugs. Uh, Fred Miller, who is a detective 3 over at Robbery Homicide, says in a deposition, not a deposition, but an interview with Kevin Hackie, that Reggie controlled the drug trade in Compton. That was 1998. But it took until 2017 for Reggie to actually get arrested. and then he gets convicted in 2020. I mean, it's like you can't make this stuff up. So what happens in between? Was he just not running drugs, or was he somehow one of those protected drug dealers? And we even saw it with Kei D. You know, when you read Kei D's book, and I've been down to Compton thousands of times, and I was down there, hanging out with a Pyru friend of mine. And I said, come on, man, cases of Cristal, cases of Dom Perignon. Was Kei D really rolling like this? He said, yeah. He said, there was money flowing around like you can't believe. And Kei D doesn't like get hemmed up for, he should have gone away for life in prison back then, but that doesn't happen. He gets some little charges here and there. So in some ways, maybe Kei D was protected. And Kei D gets hemmed up a little bit in this Compton police corruption thing, because there's a stereo shop and there's drugs, and Reggie and his father always want to know where the raids are before the raids happen. And then they go do the pre-raid and decide what's going to be, found in this raid the Compton PD is going to go do. And in Kei D's PO book is Reggie Wright Jr.'s number. And so the relationship between Kei D and Reggie Wright goes way back then. Now, on the Biggie case, the Compton PD go to meet with the original investigator a couple of days after Biggie gets killed. And they're there at the meeting when one of their cell phones rings, and it's a guy saying, Kei D is behind the Biggie killing. And so, I mean, what are the odds that that phone call would come in right when these two Compton PDs are meeting with the investigator in the Biggie thing? And so, this must be credible evidence, and they're going to go get Kei D. And Russell then takes over the case, and they find out, okay, a car that looks just like the car that was used to kill Biggie is in his backyard. So Russell has LAPD helicopters fly over. They shoot film on it, and they decide they're going to go do a raid. And so they're going to go look at that car. And they get to the car. That car hasn't been moved in months. Kei D's hiding it from the repo man in the backyard. And so they're offering up Kei D for Biggie. And who did that? Reggie did that. And then all of a sudden now we're offering up Kei D for Tupac. I mean, doesn't it seem like Reggie has been using this system as his own personal vendetta? He has something against Kei D. I guess Kei D used to date Reggie's wife or something like that. And so who knows what the beef is between Kei D and Reggie. But Reggie is the star witness at the grand jury. Reggie is the one that took all of the witnesses to and from their interviews in Vegas. And Vegas PD allows Reggie to sit in on the interviews. I mean, this just defies logic. And Edie talked about at the original statement that he made how he could identify the driver and what have you. And he gets really stupid when he shows up with Reggie and doesn't want to say in front of Reggie what he saw. And that's the intimidation that's gone on. And it would be really easy for a criminal defense attorney to debunk this whole thing in the Kei D, and just say, hey, this is like a personal vendetta against my client by Reggie, and we get this thing dropped. But so far that's not happening.
Reggie puts himself at risk. It's funny because this is similar again to the Karen Reed case I'm talking about, Massachusetts, where a lot of the main witnesses are actually suspects too. Just like Reggie is, I would call him a suspect.
He is a suspect. I mean, there's a confession letter that says he's a suspect. He's an official suspect in the Biggie.
But he's a witness. But he's a witness against Keith Davis, which is
he's paraded by Las Vegas Metro Police and the prosecutors as a witness. I mean, it just makes no sense. And I don't know how they were even able to get away with that, to be honest with you. I mean, it just makes no sense to me. A convicted money launderer, and drug trafficker is your star witness. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, a shady cop.
A shady cop,
And
somebody.
the other side of it, oh, like everyone that doesn't think Keith Davis did it, we all think shady cops have involvement in it. I mean, that's really, you either believe Keith Davis did it or you believe shady cops had something to do with it. I mean, that's really the two narratives, the two winning narratives on this that have been competing for many years, right?
Well, I think you're seeing Suge Knight, realizing what has been done to him, that his
Yep.
record label was stolen from him, his money was stolen from him. And, I actually had conversations with him and we talked about what happened, in the murders. And, Suge Knight is being vocal now. He's coming out and they asked him point blank, was it somebody within Death Row Records? And he said, yes, it was. So, we're starting to get clues about this. He's coming out and he's talking about Snoop
I was gonna
because,
say, did you hear the latest? Because I was listening to one. I've been watching a lot of his interviews from prison too. He had one that came out recently with the bodyguard that got convicted, and talking about what how Snoop let this guy take a charge for a crime he didn't do that Snoop actually did, and Snoop's promised to hook the guy up for life, and then never gave him anything. Never met him, never given him any money, nothing. The guy took a charge for Snoop apparently, and that's what the podcast was about. Suge Knight interviewing this guy. Did you hear that?
well, yeah, I did hear it, but it's 100% true. We knew that before. I mean, honestly. Um, okay,
That's
so
wild. That's wild. Like the average person doesn't know that this guy's on NBC at the Olympics. You know what I mean? It's
yeah.
unbelievable.
Well, and thing about Snoop, Reggie puts his mom on his own bank account that he's going to money launder and drug traffic through. Snoop, somebody takes a charge for him, and he will never even return a phone call or call back. And the LAPD cops had to go in and steal the evidence because there were actually two guns. There was a 9mm and a 38. I've also known this. The 9mm will shoot a 38 bullet. The 38 won't shoot a 9mm bullet. So that's how, and by the way, the person that came up with this legal strategy, believe it or not, is Suge Knight. Suge Knight shows up. David Kenner is there, and they're kind of glum about this whole thing. Well, I don't think we can beat this murder thing and what have you, and we'll just have to, let's negotiate, And he's like, what are you talking about? We got two guns that one can fire the other's bullets, so we're going to get one of those guns to just disappear, and that's the 38 that Snoop had in his hand, and we're going to say the 9mm also fired a 38. But in addition to that, we are going to steal the evidence out of LAPD's Pacific Division evidence locker. And we know just the guy that can help, and that's Kevin Gaines. Likely how Kevin Gaines gets inserted into the situation. And now we got the thieves inside the record label. I mean, this is a bad idea to have the thieves inside the record label. And I think Suge understands that this is what happened. And if you look at Nina was the publicist for Death Row, and she talks about how Snoop, even while he was coming up for his murder trial, was trying to leave Death Row Records. He had gone over and signed a contract with Warner Brothers. And Suge said, hey, we've got him locked up. That contract's worthless. And Warner Brothers tore it up. And so this has been going on for months and months and months. And in that same podcast, Suge talks about the jealousy between Tupac and Snoop. And if you look at the statements that were made by Gaddafi said that it looked deliberate in the aim, that it was jealousy, that, who this person, the dark arm that came out of the Cadillac, was specifically targeting Suge. If you look at the girls, one of the girls' statements in the car that was next to them, the Sebring that was next to them, she says that there was another gun that was coming over the top. And so that tends to confirm all these stories. So Frank Alexander says it was a 40 Glock. The coroners say it's a 40 Glock, right? Okay. We got that one. Suge says he had a 45 inched in his skull, right? From the actual shooting. Well, there were 2 shots that were fired, and it was fired from a 45 if you look at the confession letter and Chris Blatchford's statement. So this stuff is really starting to line up, and we're starting to kind of understand what happened. The cops pulled over Suge and Tupac, and a minute later they're shot on a Vegas fight night, and the Cadillac just rolls up alongside. I mean, doesn't that sound like a movie set to you? And the guy who takes the last picture of Tupac and Suge while they're alive, he is a transportation coordinator in the movie business. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's like really this stuff starts to line up and you start to realize, okay, Kevin Gaines was on special assignment for LAPD at the time of Tupac's murder from 2 days before the murder till 2 days after Tupac dies. I mean, does that make sense?
This is a cop that's dating Suge Knight's wife.
Yeah, whose
And
name
then who's also friends with Snoop Dogg, like
yeah, well,
and
no,
he yeah,
that's his manager.
yeah, it's his manager, and he's also gets killed by another cop later on. A lot of people think assassinated on LAPD approval because he knew too much and they don't
Russell
want to
thought that.
pay out. I mean, the stuff, and they're all connected, all these dirty cops. And it's funny because Mopreme, I love Mopreme Shakur. It's funny because we look at Karen Reed case. There's the Boston police officer that died. I compare that I feel bad for that family, but I don't think they've handled things correctly. Compared to Mopreme, who is just so stoic and just so like, I'm gonna go wherever the evidence is at. I'm following the evidence. He hasn't really said too much, like conclusively. At one point, I saw that he did bring up the cop issue. He said he thought cops did it way back. But lately, even with this Keith Davis stuff, you could tell he's not 100% buying it, but he's just waiting to see the evidence. He's waiting to see if there's anything real. He's looking for justice. What do you think about Mopreme, the way he's handled this, the brother and the family of Tupac?
Well, unfortunately, as the tides turn, I've seen him kind of bounce around from different viewpoints. And I think we really just have to look at, like, if you look at Chaos Merchants, every fact that's in that book is footnoted. You know where the fact comes from. And
Receipts, yeah.
Receipts. And Russell was adamant about that. So, opinions don't really matter much. But if you look at the actual evidence, there's a confession letter. Okay, what does that say? And we look at what that says. And there's salient details that are in there that are time-stamped at 1998 when it was put in Chris Blatchford's file. If we look at the witness statements, not the ones Reggie coerced as he took witnesses to and from, but the ones that happened actually at the crime scene, what everybody had to say, and you look at those actual witness statements, they start to line up with what's in the confession letter. If you start to look at, why haven't we ever seen an interview with the 2 cops that pulled over Suge and Tupac before this whole thing happened? And if you look at Las Vegas Metro, like Chris Carroll, well, I know who they are, but they're not going to interview. It's like we can't see who actually pulled him over. There is supposedly like helicopter footage of Suge and Tupac being pulled over, and Suge's opening the trunk for the cops and what have you, and it aired on MTV, right? That footage is gone. That's been wiped clean from the internet. And why did Gillespie purge all the original case files? I mean, it's like you've got so much evidence that points to, and you have Gordon Martins, who basically told me that cops were involved and that there's no secrets inside of LVMPD. And he was running for sheriff there, and he's now dead. I mean, it's like, you can't make this stuff up. And you would almost have to have participation from some dirty cops in order to make this happen. I mean, it's just you can't make it up. It blows my mind when you think about it. But, there's no way to kill somebody on the Las Vegas Strip and not get permission from a certain group of people, right?
It's a lot of weirdness on all this. It just doesn't make sense. I look at it like the Karen Reed case again. We keep bringing that up tonight. Someone actually had a question for you. Sherry D, regular viewer of the show, she says, "Will Michael Carlin produce direct the Fall of Canton, Mass?" They want to know if you're going to cover Karen Reed stuff too.
Well,
'Cause you're
you know what? That's something for sure we can talk about, offline. And I'm always open to exciting new projects. I've been down in Compton and I've been getting interviews of the original Crips and Bloods. They all have death row stories, by the way, and that's going to come out at some point. There's kind of a beef between the original Bloods about certain things, that the way they want the story told, and that's getting ironed out. But we've shot 36 interviews of the original Crips and Bloods down there, and so I've
wow.
spent quite a bit of time in Compton, and that kind of led me down to the whole Bobby Finch thing. And if you listen to Kevin Hackie about Bobby Finch, and that Bobby Finch was murdered 4 days after Tupac was shot, but before Tupac died. And Tim Brennan and Bobby Ladd say it's a blood crip war and it's a red car, and you go in and talk to the neighbors. And I actually went in and knocked on doors, dropped off newspapers, dropped off postcards, spoke to people that live on Bobby Finch's street, and they told me something completely different. They told me, if a red car even comes in, the Slum Brothers throw up pigeons and we're going to shoot them up before they ever get out of the neighborhood. I mean, that's how it was back then, because there was such a hotly contested thing, between Bloods and Crips. But they were kind of cool with each other. They just weren't, you weren't going to see a blue car in a Blood neighborhood. And you weren't going to see a red car in a Crip neighborhood. That just wasn't going to happen unless it was prearranged and somebody had a pass. So this notion of what the cops said it was is completely fake. The people on the street say nobody ever did an investigation. There was no investigation. And so you look at Bobby Finch's murder. Tim Brennan says it was a case of mistaken identity. Why? Because then we take away motive. Whatever the motive was to kill him is not a real motive. So that's a cop thing. That's how they are able to obfuscate the truth in a case. But the witnesses, the actual people on the street, have said that Bobby Finch spoke to his killer for 3 or 4 minutes before he was murdered. Now, it was 13 shots fired, 12 of which, or 11 of which, hit Bobby Finch's body. That's somebody who's a pretty good shot. Does that sound like a gangbanger to you? I mean, that sounds like a cop to me. And if we look at that,
Military. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
former military, somebody who, knew how to use a firearm.
Or Hunter.
Yeah.
Yeah. You
And
know?
Kevin Hackie is telling Fred Miller and Russell Poole that Reggie set it up. Reggie set up that murder. Now, it's not Michael Carlin saying it. It was Kevin Hackie saying it to Russell Poole and Fred Miller, that Reggie set it up, because Kevin
You
Hackie.
keep bringing up Kevin Hackie. I want to bring him up because, I mean, he basically came out and said, now, Kevin Hackie, for people, I always have trouble with this, covering this, because most of the people watching right now know all these names, but a lot of people don't. Some people don't, especially the people who regularly follow me. So Kevin Hackie was a security guard. He was working for Death Row Records, or Reggie Wright, actually, but part of the Death Row Records security crew. And he eventually said that he was working for the feds, right?
Yeah. Yeah. He was working undercover.
Yeah, he said he was working undercover, and he said he got this one point. This wild thing, he said that he got a gun that got I don't know, seized by a cop, and Reggie, from one of the outlaws, and Reggie got a call from some other cop, the police department, that cleared to go pick up. They could have the gun back, and he sent Kevin Hackie, and Kevin Hackie, instead of giving it right back to Reggie, he gave it to the feds so that they could scan the gun, and then gave it back to Reggie. And later on, that gun turned out to be the one that killed Tupac, right?
That is the story. I was at House of Blues last night. It's funny. It's like just the craziness of it all, right? But anyway, so at the House of Blues, Fatal goes in to, he's trying to hustle his gun in because he's worried about whatever. I mean, there were a lot of things that were going on at death row back then. And he tries to get his gun in and he gets flagged. They search him, they find the gun, and it's a Santa Monica police officer who finds the gun and he confiscates it. They're going to arrest Fatal. And of course, Reggie shows up and talks him out of it and says, "Hey, no, don't arrest him." Well, he goes, "Well, I'm not giving the gun back." He said, "In fact, I'm going to take this gun and we're going to ballistics check it and see if it matches anything, comes up for crimes. And if it does, we're going to come after Fatal." So the Santa Monica PD guy takes it and runs it for ballistics and whatnot. And then Reggie tells Kevin Hackie, "Hey, keep track of that gun. Keep track of that gun." So around August of 1996, he gets the phone call, Kevin Hackie, to go pick up the gun. He picks up the gun. He takes it to his handlers at the ATF FBI, and they ballistics test the gun and give it back to him. And then he gives it to Reggie. And so that gun is allegedly the gun that was given to actually kill Tupac. And that's the dark black arm that comes out, the Cadillac. It's a 40 Glock, and that's a match for the gun that was confiscated by Fatal. And guns were flowing through the evidence locker. I mean, years later, there was a semi truck that pulls up from all the guns at the gun store that were fenced that had flowed through that evidence locker. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's unbelievable. So, yeah, that's the Kevin Hackie thing for sure.
Well, no, and Kevin Hackie, I have two questions on this. First, I'll ask about Kevin Hackie because there are other outlaws I've seen saying that Kevin Hackie was providing them guns and that they almost think that he was some kind of like, I don't know, double agent or doing like a Fast and Furious on them, like, entrapment. I just wonder, do you trust him? Do you think he's legit? Like, what's the deal with? Because I'm always sus on Kevin Hackie when I see him, and I'm like, I feel like he knows a lot, but I don't know if I could trust him. What do you think about Kevin Hackie? What's your background with him?
I think it's like everybody. I mean, we're all people. We start to have families. We start to have, all kinds of things going on in our lives. And, we can be leveraged. I mean, and I'm not saying he was leveraged. I'm saying that, Kevin Hackie had one set of things he wanted to accomplish earlier in his life. And maybe that set of things he wants to accomplish later in his life is completely different. And so that's kind of the way I see it. And if you look at the statements Kevin Hackie made, and that's what I really rely upon, because I don't know Kevin Hackie. I was on one quick phone conversation with him many years ago. I've never spoken to him since. My understanding is he doesn't want anything to do with these cases now. And if you look, like he gave the challenge to Reggie about taking a lie detector test. If you look at some of the statements that he made about the gun, or some of the statements he made about Christopher Wallace in the Wallace civil trial, it was one set of things at the beginning of the Wallace civil trial, and it became something else, almost like somebody got to him. And, we can never know what that really is. And so for that reason, I personally try and keep Kevin Hackie out of things because, I don't know where he's at right now. I don't know what his head is. But if we look at his statements that he's made, like in the Bobby Finch thing, he talks to Reggie a minute after Bobby Finch is shot, and Reggie already knows about it. I mean, it's like he says in his statement, there's only way he could know, one way that he could know about this, and that's if he set it up. And he was blaming Reggie for having killed Bobby Finch. And
Didn't Reggie seem to know quickly that Russell had died too?
Absolutely.
Frank
And
Alexander.
yeah, I mean, this guy's always in the know. And you know what? He's the publicist for the Las Vegas Metro Police on the Kei D thing, because every time something's about to happen, he knows weeks and weeks ahead of time. It says, okay, well, Kei D's house is about to be raided and what have you. And like 3-4 weeks later, Kei D's house is raided. And so, wait a minute, how does he know all this stuff? How is he the publicist on this case putting out news about it before it even happens?
This
I mean,
sounds like Karen Reed again, where they publicize the snitches, who are actually doing it's the same shit. It's so funny. It's the same stuff we see in different cases. It's wild.
well, if you look at some of the redacted documents that were released, and like some of these witnesses, like Psycho Mike and what have you, it's like we're going to keep this guy's name confidential, and then a document gets released which is supposedly redacted. Oops, but we missed this one
Forget it.
redaction.
Yeah.
And you see this over and over. And Kevin Hackie actually sued the city of Los Angeles and Russell Poole personally because he was supposed to remain confidential. And people above Russell released Kevin
Leaked it.
Hackie's name. And then, he starts to get threats. And if you look at in the Snoop murder trial, there were 2 eyewitnesses that saw Snoop with a gun. And what happens to those 2 eyewitnesses? Well, Compton PD and Los Angeles LAPD show up and start intimidating those witnesses. They move the civil trial ahead so that they can find out who the witnesses are in the civil trial. And then they go out, LAPD and the Compton PD, to intimidate those witnesses. At the exact same time, they're stealing the evidence out of the evidence locker. And so these witnesses are not available at trial, and Snoop gets acquitted. But Snoop only gets acquitted of some of the charges. One charge is still outstanding. He could be retried today for the Philip Waldemariam murder because there is no statute of limitations on murder. And with the information that's bubbled up, they could retry him at any moment on that case, and they never get rid of murder files, supposedly. Of course, that happened.
No, I thought I know he got charged for something. Wasn't he charged with murder, or what
Oh,
was
no,
the
he was
charge?
charged with murder, but he was charged with like premeditated murder, manslaughter. It was multiple counts. One of those counts was a hung jury. And because it was a hung jury, it could be
He could come
retried.
back,
Yeah.
definitely.
And so,
Especially with the new evidence that's come out.
oh, yeah. And Snoop, he's going to do what he's told at all times because they've got this over his head. And that's the America that we live in today. They're going to try and get compromise on you, and they're going to try and push you around and tell you what to do. And if you don't do what they say, then they're going to, charges are going to happen. You're going to go away for life or whatever. Things worse than death can happen. And that's the America we live in today. This is the America we allowed to happen. That's what happened when, it's crazy to think about, but right, you have Admiral Morrison, who is in charge of the Navy at the time of the Gulf of Tonkin thing, and Admiral Morrison's kid is Jim Morrison of the Doors, right?
Are you familiar with the Laurel Canyon stuff? Is that the Dave McGowan? Have you
Oh
read
yeah.
that stuff? Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I know a lot about Laurel Canyon.
Yeah.
I had friends that lived
He
up
came out with a series, and that was a big part of it. Was that Jim Morrison stuff? Yeah, with his father.
Yeah, well, okay, and then take it one step further. The founder of the CIA is Miles Copeland Sr.
Yeah, his
He
father.
has 3 boys. Those 3 boys are Stuart Copeland of the police, Miles Jr. of IRS records, and Ian Copeland of FBI booking. And Ian Copeland was a friend of mine. And I used to get drunk with him.
No,
Come on, man, tell me about your dad. Tell me, I can't. And when he got drunk, he'd talk about it. And you know what? There's this unholy alliance. You got intelligence.
I
You,
want to know what he said. This is huge because I know these guys. It's funny because they're very influential in music and punk rock, and it is bizarre. It is bizarre. So, what kind of stuff would he say? If you don't mind me
well,
asking.
yeah, I'll tell you this. My deal with him was I had a trade deal. I owned Century City News. I did that newspaper for a long time. He had a bar in Beverly Hills. My friend Brendan Cahill, who lived up in Laurel Canyon, he was the manager of the Monkees, took me over and introduced me to him. And, he told me his father founded the CIA. And I was like, from that point, I was going to bug the hell out of him. And I did. And he told me about his father negotiating the hostages out of Iran. He told me about like all these crazy things. And as kids, they had this life of privilege, unlike anybody you can possibly imagine, because his father was in the CIA and one of the founders of the CIA. I mean, they traveled everywhere. They did all this crazy stuff. And then when it came time to do business, they had all the funding that they needed to do whatever they were going to do. I mean, it's crazy. And so you have this unholy alliance between music, the drug trade, the CIA, and, it just makes perfect sense to me.
Hollywood too, and Hollywood. It's all, yeah, one thing, the movie business, absolutely.
And if you do one more thing, take one more step, Matt Perez, who, successfully sued the FBI, and he had a book. It was called, I think, Systemic Evil, I think is his book, if you want to read it. And it's fascinating, his whole story about suing them and winning, but nothing changed. And in his interview with me, he talks about how nothing changed. But the one thing he says is Calderoni, who comes across from Mexico to, they're going to take down drug lord Pablo Acosta, and says, you got your corrupt guys here and what have you. Calderoni, when he fled Mexico, I was like, oh, yeah, what did he get away with? Like $50 million or something? He looked at me, he said, no, he got away with $2 billion out of Mexico, border Mexico. This is the guy who's the head of the or the federales in border Mexico in Juarez. And Calderoni tells him, he says, how did I get that money out? He said, in 1980, Reagan made the biggest bank in the world legal to launder money. And that biggest
DC,
bank
yeah,
in the world
yeah.
is Las Vegas. And so when Gordon Martins comes out and says that there is a drug ring that operates between Las Vegas and the LA County Sheriffs and the LAPD, but it's stationed out of Compton, and he says, I'm low on the food chain and I know about it. That's the deal. You have Vegas, that is the money laundering capital of the world. And it was made legal to launder money in 19 whatever it was under the Reagan administration. I mean, it's crazy, but it makes perfect sense, right?
Money makes the world go round.
And so what's going to happen in Vegas? I mean,
Days in Vegas.
yeah, these guys are going to, they are going to coerce whatever they need to get a conviction. I don't have any faith in the attorneys that are handling Kei D's case. And I think that his advisors, whoever those are out of LA in this case or whatever, are dumb. They're dumb advisors. They're not going after the evidence that they should go after. And we'll see what happens. But I don't have any faith in Kei D's people. And, I put out a few times, ways that they could defeat this case. The Gillespie thing is one. I put out the doctor that they could actually get Tupac's file from that I can't get because, it's HIPAA thing. But, that stuff's available if you subpoena it. If I had subpoena power, I could get it. But, just knowing where this stuff is good enough, right? And so
That's why they should have you on it. That's why they should have you on the case. That's crazy they don't.
they can defeat this case if they
They
really
could.
want to. And just the Gillespie thing, purging all the files. All right, well, we want to examine the original files of this. Oh, they don't exist? Dismissed. It's over. But they're not going to do that.
Not even going to try.
No, not going to try. I don't think. But you know what? What a great time to be alive. What a great time to be here. I mean, we're seeing what's going on with Elon Musk and Doge, and they're fighting corruption and what have you. But you know what? Are they really going to be successful? I don't know. Elon Musk said, hey, we may not succeed. And when you think about it, I think Pete Hegseth hasn't even made it into the lobby of DOD. He's never been into the interior rooms at DOD. You know, you got Pam Bondi and Cash Patel, and they're out doing press conferences and what have you. And they're doing, we just found an MS-13 gang member, and aren't we cool? We just arrested him today. We were up at 3:30 in the morning. Well, you know what? If they're doing press conferences, are they really looking into how to fix the FBI or DOJ?
I don't trust any of them.
I mean,
I'm the one going deeper through the like. I think Elon Musk is one of the big fraudsters. But
well,
let's get involved. Let's go back to this because I want to talk about a couple more things. I mean, in terms of Keefe D and I mean, just got you. When is it going to happen? Like, is it supposed to be June? Like, I heard it got delayed. Do you even know? Is there any trial
it's
date?
a
Any of that
year.
stuff?
I mean, it's like March of next year or something, you know. And I've downloaded the case documents and what have you, looked at them. You know, I just don't have a high confidence level that he's got adequate representation. I tried to help Suge Knight get adequate representation. That could not happen. And Reggie, if you're listening to this, and we know Reggie's listening, when you get hemmed up, bro, I will get you an attorney. I want to make sure you get adequate representation too. And I'll help anybody get a good attorney. I mean, you know, I believe that we,
Do you think Reggie will ever get hemmed up
I think so. I
again? Yeah.
honestly,
What do you think is like? What do you think it might be?
you know what? I think there's so much out there. It could be fraud just for, you know, he's on disability.
Oh,
So
that's true. Yeah.
he just put out label
Yeah.
bonds.
How do you go out in disability and then start a security company?
Yeah, and run a security company, run a record label. I mean, you
Right.
know, $500 million company you're going to run in the aftermath, and yet you're getting a disability pay. I mean, I think, and I've heard that the city of Compton is in such dire straits they're looking for money to cut off, and I think you're going to see them try and cut off Reggie's funding. And I think his disability, they're at least going to look into it. I'm pretty confident that they're going to look into it. I'm also pretty confident that right now, everybody that's talking to Reggie Wright is being recorded by the feds. I'm pretty confident that it's a two-hop rule. So if you're talking to somebody who's talking to Reggie, your phones are fair game. And so all these people are being recorded, every conversation, and it's at least being investigated. And so his mail's being, you know, looked at, his people that come and go from his place or, you know, wearing wires in to try and hem him up. And, you know, it's got to be tough to be Reggie. And every single video he's ever put out, you know what? That's all fair game. That's already been downloaded, that's already being scrubbed and looked at. And every single inconsistency he's ever put out, every lie he's told, and they're preparing deposition questions for him, I think. We'll see what happens, but it definitely is going to be interesting. What a
What I
great,
want to see. I want to see Reggie on the stand. That.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Stuttering and stammering, because, you know, he does that when he's asked a question that he doesn't really want to answer. I'd like to hear him talk about Bobby Finch. And to me, the Bobby Finch thing just shows us, if you look at the MGM tape, you can see the Compton PDs are there. They are they are making sure that this operation, which was the Orlando beatdown, goes off without a hitch. And they never thought that there would be videotape evidence of that. And you can see it in the MGM. Anybody can look at that. I put it out over and over and over again because it can never be put out enough that these guys are in on it. And if you talk to Mayor Omar Bradley, he went to the previous fight. It wasn't Selden. I forget it was like Frank Bruno or somebody. He was a guest of Don King. And when he comes out, he sees all his Compton PD are working off-duty security at the MGM. That's like the dry run. And they were doing, shh, don't tell anybody, be quiet, you know. And he was like, what? Why are you guys all moonlighting? What's going on here? You know, I mean,
Wow,
so
that makes sense. That's where they would set it up if they had control like that.
yeah,
Off the book stuff.
yeah,
Yeah. And I've seen that video for people, the MGM video. People should watch that because it makes so much sense with what you see. It looks like Orlando Anderson was planted there. He's just like he's waiting for it to go down. And I imagine they told Orlando, just take a beating and we'll give you some money. Like we want to make Tupac feel good. Take a beating, wait for the beating. Let Tupac, you know what I mean? That's what it looks like to me, is that they told this kid, hey, we want the crew to have a good time tonight, and you're on the other side, and we're mad at you right now. Show up here, take a little, won't be a bad beating. It'll just be knock you down, and we'll give you money. I mean, that's what it looks like. It totally looks like that.
When you go down into the hood and you actually meet with Crips and Bloods, right? You talk to them. Now, they want to tell you that this whole thing, it was a beatdown and a gang thing, and they're going to come back. And okay, first off, gang members know what cameras are. They know that there's video cameras in a place like the MGM. They are not going to do any malfeasance in the MGM. Now, if Tupac jumps off and does something because, he's not really a gang member, they got to jump in because they're hired to jump in and take the fall for it. That's their job. That was their piece of the security puzzle. Okay. So once Tupac takes off, they got to do it too. And you got Trayvon, who whispers, and we don't know what he said, but he said something that got Tupac riled up to go do this thing. Well, we have to have an operation, right? Got to have cops there and what have you to make sure that it doesn't go too far. Then we have to make sure that we can collect the actual security tape, because that needs to get entered into evidence against Suge if the shooting doesn't go well. And so that makes perfect sense. And you have Suge Knight saying, I told Reggie to knock it off because I know there's security cameras everywhere. And so, Suge said, if you watch the surveillance tape, they're stalking Pac, fixing to do something to him. He knows that Reggie has been fired. I told him to send 5 guys from the club, all this stuff. And so, when you see this MGM tape, it makes perfect sense. When you know that the MGM, I talked to an old salty dog guy at a security guard at the MGM, and I said, hey man, how's this stuff work, when you do fight night and whatever? He said, we hire gang cops from all the neighborhoods. We have them come here because we know stuff's going to jump off, and we need people who understand that stuff that's going to jump off, so we hire them as off-duty security. You have Gene Deal, who recently came out and said, hey, the LAPD was in Las Vegas on special assignment because, LAPD convinced Vegas that they should be hired. And so they got hired. Okay. So, we're learning more and more. And if we go back to 2015, 2014, when we originally started looking into it, they told us, all the death row people that were trying to cover this stuff up said, not one LAPD cop ever worked for Death Row Records, and they were trying to take that party line. Well, I spent 17 years in Century City, right next to Beverly Hills. I got to know some of the Beverly Hills PD, and I went over and talked to some of the old salty dogs, Beverly Hills PD, and I said, hey, did you ever run into Death Row Records people? Oh my, did they have stories to tell about that? They were like, there was this guy, his name was Kevin Gaines. He was flashing his badge in my face. There was this other guy, his name was Rafael Perez. Oh, I met David Mack, the guy who did the bank robbery. He was flashing his badge in my face and, telling me, hey, thin blue line, we got to give a pass. Doesn't that sound like gang stuff? Got to give me a pass. And, so that whole narrative collapsed. And then it became, well, they were never really paid by Death Row Records.
Hung out. They just hung out.
They just, yeah, they were just there socially.
They were just friends. They liked the entertainers.
Yeah. And then, of course, Tanique does that whole surreptitious, recording of Sharitha and Reggie talking. And she comes out and says, well, no, they were being paid cash by Snoop. And so it jigs up. And then when she starts to, because Reggie knows that he's got somebody on the other line listening in, but Sharitha doesn't. he's kind of pulling a scam on her. And so when she goes, well, there was that one kind of Vegas thing that nobody knows about, he runs her over to stop her from talking about that Vegas thing. So the evidence is pointing to Reggie, and the walls are closing in on Reggie. And Reggie came on a live stream and he said, hey, John, we got a lot to cover up, y'all. And you can't make it up. And so,
Dumb John. John is just it's so
yeah.
funny, that show that they do. Let
Oh,
me
yeah.
ask you, like, why haven't the feds done something? Like, let's pretend what Kevin Hackie even said was true. Why didn't they
Well,
act then? Why haven't they acted now? It seems like they know a lot. There is that FBI agent that's kind of spoken out about it, right?
yeah, no,
Phil?
Phil Carson has come out and he's talked about it and what have you. And Russell said, hey, they were going to make arrests. And so they took the evidence. They were going to make arrests. They were going to do prosecutions, what have you. And they ran it up the food chain and they were told, stand down, just like Russell was told to stand down by Bernard Parks. Now, when Calderoni comes over and he meets with the, agent in charge at the FBI, and he says, hey, I know who's corrupt on your side. And he runs it up the food chain and he's told, stand down, stand down. You can't know who's corrupt on your own force. I mean, doesn't that kind of tell us why there hasn't been a prosecution by the feds? I mean, they have jurisdiction. They could do it across state lines. The Cadillac supposedly got discarded in Baker. So there's enough state lines that have been crossed. And if the conspiracy started in Balboa Park in LA, and then the murder happens in Vegas, and then the other murder happens in Los Angeles, and they're related, then the feds could easily step in. But, it's not what we think it is, because there's a bigger money operation. We're talking about, music, we're talking about drugs, we're talking about, nefarious money that goes to fund covert operations. And that's why every single time somebody was arrested that had cover, like, we found out recently that there was a Pyru that was in the Pyru area, and his name was Puddin. Now, Puddin was involved with Suge, and Jewel shot Puddin. But Puddin would get arrested over and over for doing, selling drugs, but nothing ever happened to Puddin. Why? Because he was one of the protected class. He was operating with impunity in the neighborhood. So he'd get arrested, but nothing would ever happen to him. The Vikings were pissed off because they would arrest him and nothing would ever happen to him. So they started doing their own drug trafficking. I mean, we can start to see enough of the curtain has been pulled back that we pretty much have the full picture. And we go back to the David Mack statement, and he goes, I don't know why you guys are so fixated on Rampart, because it was everywhere in LA. It was all of LAPD. All of these, LAPD offices function the exact same way. And I think we start to
The
see
food
that,
chain.
well,
Yeah.
we have a system that is rotten to the core. We allowed in 1950 the intelligence operatives to come into the police departments. Jesse Ventura says the intelligence operatives were inside the state government in Minnesota, and they confronted him. It doesn't take too long before you realize that this has been going on for a long time, and it's a really bad idea to allow an intelligence operation to run roughshod over the internal country and also topple governments outside. And we've seen it over and over. Africa, it's been dictator after dictator after dictator. South America, dictator after dictator. And when our guy starts to become not our guy, he either gets murdered or toppled. They end up in the south of France. They put in the next guy, and we just go in and steal the resources. And it happens over and over and over. And it's been happening in Africa. I mean, it's been happening in South America over and over and over again. And our government has been toppling these governments using USAID and, other pockets of money to go in and destabilize things.
Definitely. Been covered a lot. It's funny because we had the feds investigating the Karen Reed stuff, and then they shut it down too.
Yeah, of course. Because, it's not what you think it is.
The same. It's so funny how it's a different case, different coast,
Yeah,
But involving police corruption, we're seeing like the same themes over and over again here.
but look at Rampart, okay? Rampart Scandal, Tupac murder, Biggie murder, bank robbery. I mean, we're talking about an armed bank robbery at Bank of America, $726,000 stolen. He never has to give back the money, cuts it, a pretty sweetheart deal, doesn't ever have to give up his accomplices, whatever. And so we look at all these people. We're talking about murder for hire. We're talking about bodies that were, never found. We're talking about bodies that were found. We're talking about all kinds of craziness. But in the end, what does it become? It just becomes a cover up. And why is it? First off, it would cost too much to pay out the money. The budget would be broken if that was ever paid out to the full extent it should have been. But what else happens? Well, there's a haggle that goes on in the consent decree. And who signs the consent decree? Mayorkas. I mean, you can't make this up. That guy is the, Homeland Security guy. He's the one that signed the consent decree in Rampart. And so it's the
Wow.
same players over and over again.
But see, I told you, you can't trust any
And
of them.
no, and it's a cover-up operation
Oh,
from stem to stern. And why is it? Because they're negotiating for more power. The feds wanted to have more influence over the police. And so they used this to cut a better deal. And once that deal was cut, hey, Phil Carson told, no, you cannot prosecute this. We're not. U.S. attorney called off. We got the deal we wanted. We're happy. The feds have more control over policing now, and they're going to buy all of our gear. We're going to militarize the police, and they're going to buy, Raytheon and Northrop Grumman stuff, and whoever else. All the defense contractors sell more stuff, and so it just completely makes sense, right?
that does. It's funny too, because you mentioned, Hollywood, the music industry, uh, and the drug trade, and also pro sports too. Like David Mack was an athlete. I'm an athlete,
Yeah.
and it's so funny too because you like Rafael Perez. I mean, I guess he ended up being like a celebrity bodyguard too. Isn't that correct? Isn't that what
Yeah, I
he's
mean,
doing
he was
now?
working for not Feinstein, Weinstein. He was working for Harvey
There you
Weinstein.
go. I mean,
I mean,
isn't that wild? I
yeah,
mean, to go from like it's just the center of the movie corruption to Weinstein. I mean, that's like
yeah,
crazy. It's wild.
yeah. And
Small
look, that
world.
stuff has been going on. Harvey Weinstein did everything that he was alleged to have done. I mean, it's
Oh,
like
definitely.
crazy, you know, and the stories circulated about him 10 years before anything happened to him.
Right.
The stories always circulate before things happen in Hollywood. And so, we're going to see it. Will the Epstein client list come out? I don't know. I mean, probably. Why wouldn't it? But we we are just one massive corrupt country, and the corruption is going to lead to collapse or it's going to get cleaned up. Those are the only two options. $36 trillion in debt. If we don't address that debt, and it's all a money laundering operation. We raised 200, $300 billion to fix homeless in California, and none of that money ever hit the mark. It's all just missing now. And it's because people got in between the money and the mark. And we just can't allow that stuff to happen. It doesn't matter whether it's Republican or Democrat. I mean, that's the thing.
Nonprofits. They have these nonprofits that scoop up the money
Yeah.
and they
You
pay off the big salaries and they get contractors. Let's talk about a couple more things I want to ask you about. You said earlier, Reggie, I think was talking some shit about you, calling you names or something.
know,
What does he say about you? I want to hear this one.
it's gone on. He calls me the rapping fool. And the
Oh, the
reason
rapping fool.
the rapping fool now is my new nickname. But what I did is I took all of these clips. Reggie was spouting off a little bit too much, and I kind of thought about it. I was like, well, what's the best way to deal with this? I was like, well, it's the music industry, and if I can't boil down what happened into like 3 or 4 minutes of a song, then I really don't know. And so I decided that I was going to do a song, and I called it Reggie's Coverup. And so it's like, hold your head out and repeat, listen to the beat again and again in my playpen till Tupac appeared to me. Finally, I see, how do we keep the music playing with these devils betraying? Rap games, ghost, hocus pocus flows, exposing my foes and their John Does. Mad respect, Russell Poole detect, murderers checked. Now rest your head, bless the dead while the message spreads. Machiavelli said, my killers have not yet bled. And so,
That's good. That's not bad. That's you know
well,
what? I'm sorry, Reggie. Right, I'm gonna call him Reggie the Rat.
so Reggie did a Pump It or Dump It where he played that song, because I did a
Oh,
song.
what did the audience didn't like it?
And no, the
They
audience
did.
said, pump it.
They
He
liked
was
it.
really mad about
Oh,
that.
I bet. I bet he got mad. I want to see
Yeah,
that one.
really mad. It was a Pump It or Dump It. And, it's just crazy to me, when you
That's
think
good.
about this stuff. But I figured, the best way to deal with this is to put him to rhyme, because I know one thing, probably long after I'm no longer on the planet, somebody's going to pick up that song and they're going to put it out. And Reggie's Coverup, Reggie is going to be immortal because somebody's going to put out that song, and it's going to make him immortal. He really is the quintessential corrupt cop. And, it's reprehensible. He put his mom on his bank account. I mean, that just says it all to me. I was looking at that, looking at the actual indictment, and it's got his mom on the bank account. That's a bad dude, you know?
Mikey Mike has noticed. Look at that. It's so funny. He says
That's
his
it.
initials do have MC, and both of us are MCs tonight. So funny.
Yeah, there
Both
you go.
Michaels, and he's
You
a
know what's-
Mikey Mike. We're
There you
all
go.
Mike over here.
Exactly. A lot of mics.
A lot of Michaels and Mikes here tonight.
That's it. Exactly.
You did. I saw you on another show. Choke no
Yeah.
joke.
Yeah.
He's got a big channel. What did you think about that? What do you think about him?
You
Uh,
know,
what do you think?
honestly, I like Choke No Joke, and I think he did a great job. I think he's been one of the people getting out there, and he's getting bigger and bigger interviews now.
Yes.
I'm proud of him. See what he's done, and he's on Piers Morgan, and he's with Rabbi Shmuley, and Rabbi Shmuley's trying to Greg Kading him and talk over him and what have you. And I saw him push back, and I was in awe. I was like, that's pretty cool. He pushed back on this guy that's trying to control the narrative and the conversation, and he did a good job. I was like, really, I thought, man, he did a great job on that interview and Piers Morgan's not nothing. I mean, that's a pretty big
Pretty
show.
big. Yeah. I know my mods like him. We have a couple of moderators who are checking him out. They like choke no joke. They told me that. They just said they saw you on his show as well. There's a guy I check out sometimes too called Del Ray Richardson. You know him?
No, I don't know these guys. And Choke No Joke, I've talked to him a few times, but I've never like physically met him. And Del Rey, never physically met him. And never, there's another guy that's doing the Art of the Dialogue. I mean, I think he's doing phenomenal work
Exactly.
right
Those
now.
are the ones I watch. Besides you, I like Art
Yeah.
of Dialogue. Yeah, and Del Rey. And that's where I got Reggie the Rat.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, I still that. I love when Del Rey calls him Reggie the Rat. Reggie the Rat Jr.
Those guys have put out a ton of truth.
They do.
You know what? Keep it coming. Keep getting these interviews, scoring these, because I listen to that stuff too. And so my current YouTube channel, I've been like enhancing and improving this whole, all these clips, this clip archive, so that we get a better picture of what happened. And every single one of those clips is important because it's people that were there. It's the Frank Alexanders and the Michael Moores and the Kevin Hackies and the, people that were actual eyewitnesses to stuff. And even Suge Knight, I really feel like Suge Knight needs a fair trial. He's got to get a new trial. He needs a fair trial. And so, I would like to see the Del Rey Richardsons and the Art of the Dialogue guys start to get a little bit more vocal about him getting a fair trial. And let's see if we can't and I am a bit of an activist, by the way. I
Thought
don't
so. I've
having
seen
that.
it. Yeah, I
Yeah,
am too. I've been an activist, so I think I'm burnt out. Like I'm more. Like now, I just say I used to be do journalism too and writing. Mostly, I'm a dog walker now. That's what I have a dog business. I walk dogs, but like I just like to host shows and have conversations. It's like the easier for me because activism is hard. Journalism is hard too.
yeah, it's
And
all
if
hard.
God bless you if you can do it, but I think it's just easier to have the conversations with the experts. Then I'm less like, you know what I mean? It's hard. I mean, how do you deal with it? Because you must have had a lot of ups and downs with all of this, especially the Tupac stuff.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean, how do you deal with it? How do you deal with the anxiety and the angst and
you
the
know.
moms? I mean, you're probably fighting for the moms too in this, I have a feeling, and the
No,
families.
100%. And I feel like the blood of Christopher Wallace, the blood of Russell Poole, the blood of Tupac Shakur, the blood of Bobby Finch, the blood of Gary Beverly, another person to mention, is crying out of the ground and wanting us to get to the truth and wanting it to become public what happened to these people. I mean, it's crazy when you think about it, and they've never been solved. And if you look at the Compton PD, now there's this whole thing about how, the Compton corruption report was, BS or whatever. But okay, let's say it was, but I don't think it was. But let's say it was. Then why, when there were 275 open murders at the time the Compton PD is disbanded, why are there only 24 murder files that are turned over to the sheriffs? So, doesn't that sound like a corrupt force to you? And, it's in the receipts. The receipts always, it's about every fact being footnoted. And here we are, this many years later, those cases are never going to be solved. Those 251 murder files, they all had loved ones, they all had mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, aunts, uncles, and kids, and they're never going to know what happened to their family member because there was a shredding party at the Compton PD before they turned over to the sheriffs. All of the Compton PD got rehired and became sheriffs, all the ones that wanted to. And why didn't they take those murder files with them? Maybe they were damning. Maybe there were cops that were behind the murders. At the same time, all those murders are happening and what have you, the cemetery is being dug up and bones are being strewn in, old bones with new bones that nobody knows what's going on with these bodies. Bodies are just missing, turned up, whatever. And that's all going on at the exact same time. And why are 251 murder files purged before the sheriffs take over from the corrupt Compton PD? So the Compton police corruption report is 100% gospel, the truth. Missing narcotics, missing guns, malfeasance like you can't believe. There should have been more firings, but it just didn't happen because, it's that thin blue line. Cops don't turn on cops.
It's unbelievable. It's hard. I know it's for some people it's hard to believe, but the thing I really like about you, Michael, is that you always bring receipts, and we posted the link to your website in the chat tonight at the top. If you go to Michael's website, scroll all the way to the bottom, and you'll see all his social media. So you can follow him on YouTube, on Instagram. Where else are you? You're on Twitter.
I'm on
You're
Twitter.
everywhere, right?
Yeah. I'm on Facebook. I don't really do much on Facebook. Maybe I should do more. I'm on Instagram. I don't really do much on Instagram. Maybe this year I'll do more on social media. I like Twitter because I just think, that I think it's become the public forum. It's become the place to be. And people want to boycott it, whatever, boycott it if that's what you want to do. But that doesn't mean that it's not going to continue to be the place to be.
We're on X as well. So definitely follow Michael on X or Twitter, whatever you call it now.
It's
And
it's
YouTube, especially. Make sure you're following Michael on YouTube. What's coming up? You said you're going to put out this thing with the Crips and the Bloods.
Yeah.
Is that like a movie? Is that
It's
something
going to
coming
be a
out on
movie.
YouTube? How's that? Yeah.
No, it's not going to be YouTube. It's going to be a movie. And I've been working on that project with the former mayor of Compton. And so, I've had a lot of reach into Compton, and that's given me a lot of insights into this case. I worked on a number of political campaigns down in Compton, people that were running for office in local elections down there, and that gave me other insights. Like who hung out with who. Everybody knows everybody down there. So some of the people that are suspects in this, I've been hearing about how they grew up and who they hung out with and all that kind of stuff by being down there. And so that film, everybody that's in that film has a death row story. And the Birth of the Crips and the Bloods, there's going to be some things that are going to come out. I'll just give you a quick highlight. One thing that's going to come out, there were trainloads of guns that were left on rail spurs. And, the original Pyrus went in there, a few of them, because they had seen the train cars, and they got a few of the guns, but it was in a Crip neighborhood. So when it was found out that there were guns inside that rail car, well, then the Crips surrounded it and they took all the guns, and they watched it. So now you got the Crips armed and Pyrus not armed. And so what do they decide to do? It's July 4th weekend, and the entire National Guard go off to party and leave the National Guard armory with one padlock on it. That's it. And so they go in and they steal all the guns out of the National Guard armory. And so, you know, it's kind of like one of those things. You really see the invisible hand that's behind all this craziness that goes on. When we see Tim Brennan and Bobby Ladd talking about blood crip war, well, just a week before there was a murder that was a crip that got killed. And so, is it really a blood crip war? It's not a blood crip war. That's all BS. Likely started by the police. You recently had Kei D Jr. talk about how Reynolds was probably behind one of the shootings, the first shooting. Well, and Bobby Finch is the second shooting. And so, it clearly wasn't a Pyru that shot up Bobby Finch. That was a cop or somebody, military affiliated or a really good shooter. And it wasn't a red car, it was a blue car, and there was no police investigation. So what does that tell you? If they weren't going to investigate it, maybe they didn't want to investigate themselves. And so we see the government's hand in all this stuff.
A lot.
And
Yeah.
it is a lot. And you know what?
We see it a lot too, though. I mean, we could just again, like it reminds me of the Carolyn case. It's like the same. They don't want to investigate themselves. That's it,
No,
right? I
no.
mean,
And we go back to the Puerto Rico thing. The cops are doing the killing in Puerto Rico, and they're messing up the crime scene so that no prosecution can ever happen. And I just wonder, maybe that's just how policing works in America today. And, that's why it needs to change. That's why we need to have reform. 200 grand, and you got to bring your own insurance. Every murder, regardless, it's going to trial. There's going to be a jury appears. If a cop kills somebody else, it's going to go to trial. There's going to be a jury. Mount your defense. We need to take all the jailhouse attorneys, all the disbarred attorneys, put them into a pool and let them help people get a good defense, with the pleadings or whatever, and prep the attorneys so that the attorneys that show up in court, they don't have to do the legwork, and you can mount an adequate defense. And then we need to have the law students go in and audit every judge. Every single judge needs to be audited on every single case. And so that's kind of my solution for all this, because, as humanity, right, we're going to have robots. Tesla's building all these robots for us, and they're going to vacuum and what have you. We're going to have a lot of time on our hands.
so go to court. And if I
We're
don't
going
have
to
to
go to
work, if
court.
they're gonna walk the dogs, then I can
Yeah.
go to court.
There you go. We get somebody to walk the dogs, and then you can go to court, and we can audit the judge. We can make sure that somebody gets an adequate defense. And then the other thing we must do, it's got to just be about the facts of the case. I mean, I don't care if somebody's black, white, green, pink, blue. I don't care if they're Mormon or Christian or Muslim, or I don't care about any of that stuff. Whatever the facts of the case are, gay, straight, trans, it doesn't matter what they are. They get an adequate defense, and it only comes down to one thing. Did they or did they not do this crime? And I don't care about other crimes. I don't want to hear about other crimes. Oh, but this guy, he did, you know, he looked wrong at this woman and she hit him. I mean, I don't care about that. Did he do this crime? And it's just got to stand on its own. And so justice truly needs to be blind. And then maybe one day America will fulfill the the promise that we have of liberty and justice for all.
Let's hope so. It's been a long time coming for Tupac and the Biggie family. Christopher Wallace, Tupac Shakur. I'm so glad you came on tonight, Michael. And,
Well,
it's been
thank
a
you.
pleasure to have you on, and I'd love to have you follow up too, especially when these trials come up. Any new news, I would love to talk to you again on
Sounds
here.
good.
And I know we've been on both. I just realized that earlier. We've been on both channels tonight. I didn't quite realize that. We're doing a simulcast, so we're on both channels tonight. If you're watching on my channel right now, it's my one of my moderators pinned it. You can follow Michael on YouTube and Twitter. Please check him out and definitely give him a follow. I want to thank you again, Michael Douglas Carlin, author of Chaos Merchants, Tupac 187. He's been. We didn't even mention you were in that Benjamin Crump series that I saw. It was like TNT or something like that. What was that
It
network
was
that was on?
A&E, A&E,
A&E. That's right. One of the
and
big ones.
yeah,
That was huge.
episode 5 is the death row takeover. And more and more stuff has bubbled up. I mean, Benjamin Crump, no, it couldn't possibly be, and then they get on to the next one or whatever. But as more information has bubbled up, and as we saw, Reggie in the hot seat on that one, and Sharitha in the hot seat, and it looks more and more plausible that this is what happened to Tupac, and then it's also what happened to Biggie.
Sure, seems like it to me. Someone asked, we just got a question here from Inlam Pickets related to George Carlin.
I think so. Like
You
this,
are.
yeah, some kind of distant thing. And we just don't know about this stuff, but we start looking at lineage and whatnot, and there's a story that his family tells, that my family tells, that seem to be related. I don't know. I have
Wow.
never done the genealogy.
It's wild. He's like the greatest. To me, he's
Oh
the
yeah.
greatest comedian of all time.
Well, let's remember one thing that he said: it's a club, and we're
You
not
ain't in
in
it.
it. And we're not
Yeah,
in it.
no, yeah, we're not in it.
They're,
Oh,
they hate us just as much as they hate anybody else. I mean, and we saw it with COVID, right? They want to shake us off the planet. They could care less if we're here, and you know, they don't care. So it's a club, and we're not in it.
thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here tonight, Michael. And we'll talk soon. And good luck with everything. I'll be watching you on YouTube. I'm sure you have some upcoming videos coming up and checking you out. And thank you so much for being here tonight.
All right, brother. Take care.
Awesome.
Peace.
Thank you. And that's Michael Carlin. That was great. That was phenomenal. I enjoyed that. Ah, thank you, Michael. Got a lot to offer. That was it's like 2 hours, 2 hours plus, 2 hours and 16 minutes. He's got a track of a lot of information. Amazing. I want to thank Michael for being here tonight. I did think about covering that maybe some of the police audit stuff, but I maybe do that another night, maybe tomorrow night or even Thursday night. But the big thing on that, I just wanted to say, it's like the Canton police audit. If you're reading it, it's like all stuff that we've been reporting on the show for 2 years. It's all stuff that you've seen Canton residents speak about 2 years, every couple weeks at the Canton Select Board at the public comment. Stuff that they ignored for 2+ years is now in a report. I mean, so funny, isn't it? The Canton Select Board just could have just watched the public comment, took in some notes, and they would they wouldn't have had to do an audit. Yeah, 200 plus pages. There is some good stuff in there. There's some stuff in there that I kind of shake my head at. I think I don't think they went deep enough, but it's good. It's good that we have this document. There's a lot that we can refer to, and I think it's going to be helpful for the Karen Reed defense. I think it's going to come up there as well. But it's just funny, like self dispatching. That Canton police use telephones to self dispatch instead of using the radios. Where did you hear that first? They could have just watched our show and I mean all half the stuff that I'm reading in that Canton police audit, I'm like, oh, we talked about that. We reported that. We had all these people from Canton came on and told us about it. It's just so funny. Yeah, the self-dispatching. There's two levels of service in Canton. There's people that call 911 and call the Canton Police Department when they have a problem. And then there's other people that have local police officers' numbers in Canton and they call those police officers to come for service. And it talked about that, how Canton police are allowed to use their own personal cell phones for police business. And basically, the audit is suggesting that the Canton police actually buy their officers' cell phones so that they're not using their personal phones for business because the radios apparently don't work that well. So a lot of the stuff that you'll see in that Canton police audit, we've talked about, and not myself so much talking about it. It's the guests, the people that we've had on from Canton have told us about this stuff over and over and over again, and now it's in the police audit. So that was interesting. We also have the Karen Reed retrial going on right now. They just did jury impanelment today. I think they have one juror so far. Like pretty much everybody seems to know about the case and have an opinion. It's gonna be wild to see how long. I think it's gonna be 2+ weeks before they have a jury. So I think I'm taking tomorrow night off, maybe. I don't know. If not Thursday, one of those nights, Wednesday or Thursday, I'm gonna take off. I might come back tomorrow. I might do a show maybe about the Canton police audit. We'll see. It's a lot up in the air. On Friday, I have an attorney on the show, AV to the 7th. Check that out. That's going to be a good show. Talking about the Karen Reed case on Friday night, 6 p.m. Definitely check that out. So I think I'm going to head out tonight. I want to thank everyone for watching and super chat. Thank you, Sarah, who gifted 10 Young Jurks memberships. Sherry D, thank you. Thank you, Bree. Thank you, our new members tonight as well. I want to thank everyone last night. We had a phenomenal show with attorney Mark Betterow. And we did get a couple of Venmos last night that I didn't acknowledge. So I'm going to do that right now. What do we got here? Cheryl sent $10 last night. She said, great show with Betterow. Thank you for your coverage. Thank you, Cheryl. Also, Mary sent $20 on Venmo last night and said, keeping the truth. And Pamela P, she sent $100 last night and said, much respect and appreciation. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. That was last night. I didn't realize that they were sending money. That was amazing. Thank you so much for that last night. So I want to thank everyone in the chat. If you're new here, please subscribe, like and subscribe, follow us. Okay, we do a lot of live shows. Check us out. We got some good guests. All right, I'm heading out. Have a great night, everyone. We'll see you next time.